Hello, my name is Rahul Kumar. I'm the head of architecture in GAF.
My name is Heath Johnson. I'm a technical platform manager for our identity and messaging services.
So at this point in time, the first thing we would like to tell you is that global scale. What is global scale? Because global scale to different companies, global scale to different people means different things. In our term, when we talk about global scale, it was truly 400 locations around 80 countries and 15,000 employees. That means we had 16 languages that we had to deal with, and working with that kind of scale is what we are talking about for Standard Industries and GAF. In most of the cases, when we are talking about manufacturing companies or we're talking about old 125-year-old companies, how do they grow? They grow through mergers and acquisitions. They acquire small companies. They are organic growth between the markets, the consumption of the markets. And what that adds is the complexity in their applications in an Active Directories. We have tens and tens of Active Directory domains for us running around in all different countries, and that is the challenge, is what we are trying to accomplish is how are we going to solve that challenge and make the global deployments. When we talk about different ADs, we talk about different regions, we talk about different data protections, we talk about different password policies. How are we going to harmonize password policies that are in France, in Germany, in South America, in North America, in Asia Pac, in Australia? Those all complexities is what we have to deal with, and those are the challenges that we have to deal with. We have different email formats, we have different login formats, from SAM account names to first name, last name, first initial, last initial, and myriad of other things.
Yeah, and of course with all that comes the pieces, right? Hundreds of mail domains spread across 5, 6 different mail systems. Not only that, but you got, sometimes they're compatible, sometimes they're not, right? So some of our high arching goals, our 3 main objectives were, number one, in the immediate, to provide a state-of-the-art platform for authentication, multi-factor, and expandability to provide us with a full-scale identity solution moving forward. 2 primary factors of that were the fact that we were moving to G Suite.
Right.
So we wanted to help get a piece of technology that would help us not only get there, but stay there and manage that moving forward. And then long-term, to put us in a situation where our identity became a global standard and we're able to integrate that with our user onboarding, offboarding, and your typical account management scenarios.
So as you can see is that since the company that our company is in so many countries, we have governance issues. When we talk about Works Council, when we talk about GDPR, CCPA that Canada is rolling out, how do you deal with those complexities? And so one of the objectives for us was also to go in and try to rationalize and try to work with the complexities of the governance platforms and roll that out with Okta. Then Works Council, we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail about what it entails to get a Works Council involved and how does it work when you have to roll out these global platforms. It may be Workday, may it be ServiceNow, G Suite, Okta. It all depends, and everything has to go through Works Council. We'll talk about that. And another objective was also to have a common standard. Every country comes in there. We have a cookie cutter template now. If we onboard a new company or if we go to a new region, we know exactly how we are going to do because we have defined the standards and we have defined across all the organizations. And that was one of the main objectives that we wanted to achieve. So let's think about the challenges that this scale comes in. With each separate IP networks, you're going to have many data centers across the globe, and you cannot have traditional on-prem software running on those because if they all have to talk to each other, they can't because there is so much IP overlap on that one. So how are we going to solve for those challenges where all the data centers don't connect to each other and we cannot have a traditional reverse proxy or federated AD systems where all the other ADs are like virtual ADs. Those systems cannot work in these kind of scenarios. Then we also have to deal with the multiple languages and multiple time zones that across all the countries. So those are some challenges that we had to deal with.
And you know, from the technology standpoint, you're often going to have, when you have such a spread out footprint, you got 27 different ERP systems or whatever you have, right? And each one of them is going to have their own requirements in terms of identity, credentials, whatever you've got there, whether it's certificates, you know, keys that you're dealing with. And a lot of times those systems may not always play well together, right? So a common ground for them to be able to all synchronize to and from eliminates some of those issues that you come in them talking directly to each other. And another thing that has to talk to each other, obviously, is your personnel. You know, the other challenge that was a non-technical was the people challenge, right? Whether it be training, whether it be the language barrier from having support centers in Europe versus North America versus Asia Pacific, wherever we may have them. Not only the support, but the administrators of the systems, the owners of the existing directories, whether your HR teams, you know, they're all spread. The time zone differences, as Rahul mentioned, just a lot of the challenges that come with working in a global environment.
So the way we came about is we actually made Okta as a center for our hub and spoke software. So since you have multiple Active Directories and they cannot talk to each other, so the AD in Germany has no connectivity that is ADs in London and in North America, then how do you synchronize identities? How do you synchronize people? How do you synchronize applications, bring them together? So we rolled out, that was the primary reason for us was the Okta. It brought in all the information back into the universal directory, and from there we started onboarding, you know, maybe it's a ServiceNow, maybe it's Workday, G Suite, and that gave us the flexibility. And using the OIDC and using the SAML, we could use any commercial off-the-shelf applications. So to get to this solution actually is a very long process, and I think that's what we wanted to highlight is how did we get there? One of the first things that we did was proof of concept. And one of the recommendations that we will try to give you is you have to really run the proof of concept on the environment you are trying to implement. So the first thing you probably should be planning to do is find what is the right optimal proof of concept scope and have a success criteria to measure those proof of concept. In our terms, we did multiple data centers, we connected multiple applications just to see how the latency is going to work. Because if you have a tenant, Okta tenant in, let's say, Europe, then all your US logins have to go across the pond and come back. On the conversely, if you have the tenant, Okta tenant in US, then all your European countries have to come back and do this one. So which one is the closest one? What are the density of users running in which countries? Those are the things that you have to decide and figure out what you need to do. Try the Active Directory sync, work with the profile master, play with the Okta. And I think initially, what helped us greatly is because we know our environment, but Okta Professional Services know Okta. So we worked with the pre-sales team, we worked with Okta Professional Services team, and they really helped us unlock what we wanted to do. Once we did the POCs, we had the tangible outcomes, then we started to go into our design phases. But running the POC is the most critical part of actually a global deployment, because you will never know what's the outcome and how things are going to behave if you're not going to try it. So,
you know, and in terms of scoping that, first, obviously, you have to look at what you've got, right? So evaluating your existing infrastructure. The obvious choices, your directory, look at your, you know, we are largely site-driven in our legacy environments. So, you know, look at your directories, see how many, how big, what are you dealing with, right? That gives you a lot of your scope. As Rahul mentioned briefly, the bandwidth and network connectivity. If you're going to implement a solution, and a lot of times we all know access is expected to be immediate these days, right? Particularly from resource-hungry consumers in your business. So the ability to make a change from anywhere, have that change go into effect right away when it comes to an access or a password reset or whatever the case may be, is a critical piece of it. It's also critical in terms of maintaining your Okta environment. making sure that you deploy the right number of agents, making sure that you've chosen the right agent for your environment, and that those agents are sustainable and maintainable in a manner that keeps your systems up and running and up to date. The other pieces that we really had to work hard on was coexistence. In fact, we're still in a coexistence strategy in some of our solutions, right? We've been on Okta about 1.5 years now, and we're still phasing out some of our legacy solutions, whether it be mail, directory, the management of groups is a big one that we're still growing into with Okta. So those are all pieces you want to look at that stuff. Your non-user resources. This is something that we looked at ahead of time, made some critical decisions, what we thought. In our decision-making process, we basically went with the least access model. We said, all right, these are known critical resources that are not user-bound but have to come with us, right? And so we moved those with the understanding that, hey, we can always go back and get other things later if we need them. And you want to look at things, just a couple of items I list on here to think about in that nature is groups. How are your groups used to support critical business processes that may have to fall in line with, say, your mail client, right? Your service accounts is another one. A lot of times you think, all right, we've got a service account on this back end. It's using an Ldap connector from this application to make a call straight to our directory. But what you may miss is that application also uses that Ldap to deliver email because it was plugging into Exchange on the back end. When you move into a cloud-based mail system, that's going to break, right? You may still be able to make that Ldap call effectively, but you will not be able to deliver a message to a mailbox that is no longer on an AD connected. File shares is another one
File shares is great.
People don't necessarily think about. There may be critical business processes, so we're a manufacturing company, so we have a lot of one-off processes with custom manufacturing. We have these workstations sitting out there that may run a spreadsheet that's got a mail call embedded into it. Or there may be a file share that's using a back end. There may be a non-Windows box that requires Ldap or something of that nature to make a call for permissions that you have to take into consideration when you move these identities around.
So just like Heath was mentioning, is that we did our due diligence in POCs and planning it out. Means it looks like a waterfall project, but if you don't do your due diligence on, especially when you're rolling out global things, you tend to miss a lot of things. The next step that we did was we actually went in the architect phase. This includes working with every IT department as well as every senior management in each country to standardizing the mail format. Now, since we are rolling out one global G Suite tenant, that means, as Heath was mentioning, we have tens and 15s of mail servers running around with all different mail formats. Now, this includes standardizing the first name dot last name to 160 mail domains that we have. Now, coming back to the point is, when you move identity and access management, your email format changes. That means every SAML interface that you have created in those legacy applications on that AD with those ADFS clusters running around the globe has to change. So those are the things that you have to really think about it and figure out what is the migration path you have to do. And it took us a while to figure out what is the mail server, what are the standardizations of email addresses we are going to do, what's the login entity on Okta has to be done. You have to figure out what are the attributes you're going to bring in from Active Directory back to Universal Directory. In our case, we leverage a very obscure, unknown custom attribute, which was not used in all our 21 Active Directories, and that was the one that we wanted to choose as an anchor point for us. So those are the things that you have to think a little bit outside the box and architect that. And documentation is required, because from the architecture point of view, the same documents that you use to create and document what it is will be used by all the network AD admins across the globe, as well as the help desk, to actually understand what the system is doing and how it's doing. So I would highly recommend you document whatever you guys are doing so that it's used by the other team members for that.
Another piece that often gets overlooked, I know we all probably have to live with it in IT, is change management. It's difficult, especially on this scale, right? And I don't simply mean it's a challenge to get it done, but the coordination efforts. We go back to the same stuff we talked about before, the time zones, the languages. Do you have a global change management? Do you need to establish that? What kind of standards are you going to share in those processes? Because those could also be segregated between the different companies. And the best piece of advice I would say we can give from that standpoint is engage them from the first step.
Yeah.
As soon as you make a decision, we're going with Okta, they should be involved. Because not only does it help ease the transition in terms of the user base, it takes that a lot of time communication and impact off of the technical personnel who should be focused on building the system.
So what we did was we actually, same time that we started our plan and design, we actually started the change management track right then and there. And one of the reasons was to actually socialize the changes that we are trying to make with 15,000 employees in 18 languages in different countries. How are we going to plan that? And we actually used a third-party company to actually do training on site. We did quite a few training and involving the Works Council. So what it takes to get that, it's every Works Council, either it's France or Germany or Russia or China, whatever it is, it'll take months for you to get the approval from them on the change of process by employees. So don't think that, we are releasing Okta tomorrow, let's go to Works Council, and then tomorrow and, next week we'll get an approval. It doesn't work that way in Works Council. So you have to really plan that thing out and plan working with them, your external partners, your lawyers, whoever may it be, to get those things started well ahead of time.
And when it comes to time to actually do the migration, some things to keep in mind. Always evaluate the quality of what you're moving, right? You don't just want to pick up everything and move it just because it was there, right? We all know any directory environment that I've ever seen, there's always some sprawl, right? There's always some garbage that we're going to clean that up later. Sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't. And we being a private company, it's probably worse since we're not quite as regulated as anybody who works for a public company. So when we made this migration, we also took it on as an opportunity to do some cleanup. And so when we went back and pulled all of our data and our user groups and lists, and we spent weeks poring over them, giving ourselves bleeding eye syndrome from staring at spreadsheets for weeks upon weeks upon weeks and just sorting and purging and cleaning users. And then once you've gotten to the point where you've identified what you want to move, identify how you're going to get it there.
Right.
It may not be, with the number of systems, you may not be able to just pick everything up and move it. Not everything you want is going to be an AD. Not everything you need is going to be an AD. So you may have to leverage additional tools. You may have to engage partners to help with that, whether it be professional services, third parties, whatever your landscape looks like, you want to make sure you find the right resources to turn it into where you want to go. And basically only move what you need, right? As I said before, identify your critical items, plan effectively for that coexistence so then you can put it back together if you need to, if you miss something. And then when it comes time to do that, who's going to do the work, right? Is it going to be, all our help desk is going to talk to every user and walk them through this process? With 15,000 global employees, it's not very realistic. But everybody's going to have to sign into Okta and create a profile and create a security question, right? So you put together some one-sheets, some cheat sheets for the day one users. You decide what your staging is going to be in terms of migrating your population. And then you leverage resources. Hopefully, we actually, in our case, set up a dedicated team to provide a warranty period for our G Suite and Okta migration to say, all right, email this address, call into our help desk, you get this option to go to directly to the Google Help team, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we had both our educational partner and some of our internal resources who understood our business working together to provide that immediate reaction first-line support for those people who got migrated so that on the day one, they had a successful introduction to the new platform, both Okta and Google. And we weren't getting in people's way and making them stumble over themselves that here you're going whether you like it or not. Really helped us, I think, in our acceptance and in our overall business interpretation of the products that we went to. And then how do they know what to do, right? Who's going to be responsible for imparting the knowledge on whatever staff will be delivering those services and upholding that support? That all needs to be defined ahead of time. And, keep in mind that where you're going may not look exactly like where you came from. So certain groups, certain roles, certain permissions and privileges needed to provide that support, leverage those users, may or may not be there. You may have to do some work to customize your new home to fit your existing family.
So,
You also, again, on the user level instructions, in our case, we changed a lot of people's email addresses. Yeah. So that was a big one. You have to make sure, obviously, in our situation, we preserved all those aliases and alternative email names and all of that stuff for people so we don't disrupt ongoing business. But the communication of, hey, this is now our standard, that was actually handled by our corporate communications departments. That way, they buffered us from any feedback or kickback from the business users who are like, I've had this email address for 20 years. Why are you changing it now? You can still use that. You don't have to get all new business cards, but moving forward, you're going to use this for login. It's probably in your best interest to get accustomed to using this as an email address, because it is. Right. And then, as Rahul has mentioned a couple of times, all of that training material, not only for the users, but for the admins, all has to be translated into 15, 16 languages, however many it might be, and spread across the world to do that.
So, now we're going to talk about some best practices. When you are doing an Okta import, I think what we learned pretty quickly while onboarding first, second, third ADs is define a separate locations for your groups and users and only bring that in. One of the things that we do not recommend is bringing, if you go in Okta and you say AD sync and you do go to the top level OU on Active Directory, it's going to bring in every group that was ever created an AD. And now if you have 21 of those, guess how many all users do you have? 21. So those are the things that you're going to we're going to actually discourage to you is do not import all the groups. You import only the groups with the specific locations. In our case, we actually defined a very standard locations in our AD, saying if you want to import any group, put this in this location, and Okta is going to suck it in. And that's how we try to do that. We also defined network behavior rules on network and off network, and we defined all the different login parameters, two-factor parameters, and everything else because we have 400 locations in 80 countries. It was very important for us to do segregations on which countries we are here, what are the in networks, what are the out networks. It was a very defined practice for us, but actually it really helped us define the behavior and use the AD groups, Okta groups to define your segmentations and user behaviors. When you roll out a single country, one forest, it's much easier to do. But when you are doing it at such a large scale, we defined lots of group rules. And group rules were really, really important for us because as soon as you start bringing in Active Directories, we started creating group rules automatically, filling the users in there, and then driving the behaviors that is automatically done. So we don't have to do day-to-day management of adding people in the group and removing people in the group. So that really helped us create that, and said that was one of the best practices that I would highly recommend you do. Create a lot of group rules, define your segmentations, and use the Okta as the universal directory, not just the syncing of the tools, syncing of the user profiles from A application to B applications. Don't use it as a tool, just use the whole universal directory as it's meant to be.
So some of the things we learned, right? What not to do, what to do. The first one that we are working on now, which we all wish we had done sooner, was the self-service password reset. Would have been great to introduce that to the users when we migrated them. We chose not to, and then it's something that we have been striving to get to ever since. So that is definitely one. If you have the opportunity to roll that out, I say the sooner the better. We expect that it's going to have a huge impact on our service and support teams, our help desk, our desk side people. They're doing these 2 to 3 times a day. That's a big workload that we might be able to help them alleviate and free them up to do some more stuff. It's also a nice win for a lot of our users. We have a large mobile sales force, spread out all over the country they're heavily reliant on VPN. So, and we have password expiration policies. So it also presents an opportunity for us to help alleviate that remote password reset thorn in the side that we've all been dealing with for the last 15 years, right? If you do change your email addresses, which we did, something's going to break. No matter how much planning, no matter how much discovery you do, you're going to find these 5 people over here who do this one-off process that relies on an SMTP relay of some kind or some other system that it's tied into that's not visible to the IT staff.
Right.
Right? It's a wholly business-owned process consuming a service that is innocuous. 5 emails a day, you're never going to notice that when you're processing 400,000, right? So it's going to break, and you just have to have, again, that response ready. In our case, it was a dedicated support channel. We highly recommend you go for that. Two pieces that we stumbled on a lot were a couple of Ldap-based applications. I know I've mentioned that a couple times, but we really did come into some business-critical applications that were reliant on that. And not only did it shape the way that we had to do our deployment inside Active Directory, particularly what values we put where, because we had legacy systems that were relying on specific AD attributes that we couldn't modify or manage. And then establish and communicate an ongoing cleanup strategy. Again, the sprawl, right? One of the objectives is don't take anything you don't need, and make sure when you do move, you set some standards. If any users who haven't completed their Okta profile within 90 days, are they going to use it? Reach out to those business owners and managers to find out, is this really needed? Does this person really need an email account? Do they need access to this? Do they need access to that? And that'll help you keep it clean if you establish that going in. And then the non-personal identity usages, I kind of touched on that earlier, groups, service accounts, policies, things that you don't necessarily think about when you think of identity, right? Because identity we tend to tie to a human being. And in a lot of cases, it's not just, there's not a person sitting on the other end. It's a service account running as a service or whatever the case may be.
So I think I want to talk about customer first, because the journey that we did for almost a year and a half would not have been successful if we didn't have the customer first team with us from Okta. Professional services was a paramount for us. Our initial rollout, we had professional services doing work hand in hand with us, working in, actually doing the rollouts when we were doing North America, when we were doing Germany rollouts, when we were doing London rollouts. They were with us on phone calls 24 hours a day and helping us through the journey. And what it also gives you is that their vast knowledge of the prior experiences as well as our knowledge for our own environment, which actually is the perfect combination for a successful project. So having a professional services was really, really critical for us. It was actually highly recommended. And I have to give out a shout out to Michael Anthony and Scott Barnett, our customer service first team. They are perfectly awesome. They help us, unlock so much Okta, potential. So we have monthly meetings, we have QBR meetings, we come to know about newer things, roadmaps, and they are actually very in tune with our applications, with our entire global infrastructure. So they suggest things that we probably might have missed. And I'll talk about a little bit more about the professional services, customer service, customer first.
Yeah, ongoing, right? And we see them as a critical tool in our path forward.
Right.
Because, as he said, we have monthlies, we have QBRs. Mac, we're in touch once or twice a week about something, right? Whether it's a simple question, he's always asking us, where are we going? What are we looking at? What do you guys want to do next? To make sure that our solution aligns with our goals, right?
Right.
And we get a lot of value out of that.
So going way forward, since it's a global deployment, it's a big, huge ship. It takes time for things to come back in. We are moving so many SAML applications across the globe into Okta. I think we are planning to dabble into the API management of Okta, because now we are looking at, we have figured out our employee persona, our contractor personas are very, in Okta. How do we work with the external contractors and APIs? So in our view is that We're going to evaluate the API offerings, and as well as we are starting up a new project for an HR as a master that will help us streamline the onboarding and offboarding process, because most of our systems that we roll out, they are global in nature, and simplifying the entire global process will really save us a lot of money.
Yeah, that is, our next big step is definitely HR as a master. But in general, we have gotten to a point where we've established Okta is our authentication platform, period. We have retired the majority of our applications and services that relied on other systems. Most of our ADFS footprint is gone, so on and so forth. We still have a few things. But any new applications that come in, it's an Okta first mentality. We'll only consider other authentication options if we can't get it to work on Okta. And that's going to be our standard moving forward. We're up to 48, I think, applications now. So we've had a pretty rapid growth in terms of the applications and acceptance of it. And it is because, a big part of it is because of the OIN, the Okta integration network of applications. It's such a vast library that has the canned, excuse me, and ready to go instructions on how to implement so many good apps. And even the ones that aren't, SAML apps are super easy to integrate.
Yep.
And we've had great luck with them and plan on continuing that footprint moving forward.
Right. So I think that overall finishes up our presentations. Now we'll open up for Q&A.
Thank you. Hi. I had a question about the roadmap you were talking about. You said you've been working with Okta for like 1.5 years, and you're still doing things. So how are you working with the roadmap? Like, how far in the future is it going? How do you decide what goes where?
Well, we talk internally, right? We identify the resources that we want to move, and we talk with Mac. But we talk about, what we're looking at this system that we have. We want to move. What kind of implementation time are we looking at? What kind of availability would we look at? Should we need to engage professional services? So we're trying to think. I would say right now I have a roadmap that runs through the end of the year and actually bleeds over a little into Q1 of next year as far as Okta is concerned. We've got a half a dozen items on there. Most of them are just, integrate this app, integrate this app, integrate this app. But we do have some larger arching things. We have recently been piloting the AMFA. We'll be turning that on pretty soon. As I mentioned, the self-service password reset is also on that roadmap. So it's 9 months to 12 months is what we're trying to stay ahead of it.
And also we are doing app rationalizations, right? So we have multiple IAM products in different countries, and then we are trying to figure out what does those IAM products do that we can onboard in Okta, right? So we are also trying to eliminate other applications that are doing the similar stuff but in a smaller capacity. So that's why when we talk about roadmap, is the API management, is API authentication and management between machine to machine, as well as if you're exposing APIs to third party, how would you maintain it, how would you manage it, how you manage the scopes and everything else, the identities of those service accounts. I think those are a couple of different products running around the globe, which we want to consolidate. So that's how we do the road mapping. It's a tactical road mapping and then app rationalization and forward-looking road mapping to consolidation for that.
Thank you. I have another question, actually, if I can steal the mic for a bit. The timing between implementation of Okta and G Suite for the end user, how was that?
Simultaneous.
So same day?
Yeah.
Okay, and how did that
We went
work?
live on both.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it went great. I think
Yes.
it would have been much more difficult to do one or the other.
Yes.
I really do. 1 week.
Because they had to create the profiles and yes.
And then the users had migrated data in G Suite that day as well?
We did, yes.
We pre-staged a lot of data, actually. And then there was a migration day move as well.
Yeah, I think in our case, what we did was we did it in waves of 1,000, 2,000 users, and we pre-stage day minus 1 month. That was preloaded, and the top-off was done on the weekend off that go live.
Yeah.
So that kind of strategy worked that we rolled it out. So, but you can't chew more than a few thousand users because physics doesn't work.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
In your experience, do you think Okta's security administration model is fine-grained enough to allow for delegated administration? And if not, what was your solution to that?
I would say it absolutely is. We use it on a day-to-day basis. As we mentioned, we've got dozens of AD forests spread all over the world. It gives us the opportunity to provide, say, a service desk agent with, just as from a strictly Okta example, we can give them a help desk role on only their group of users.
Right.
Whether it be Germany or this domain or this subset of users, even if we wanted to, we could say, all right, well, this service desk agent who's tied to application X can reset passwords or change IDs only within these application assignments. So as far as the delegated authentication piece, our goal is to move to a universal directory, not to use a directory tool to modify our legacy systems. So I don't expect that we're going to be going that direction.
No, and also I think adding to the Heath's point is we don't give global admin or super user admin access to every country
Right.
AD admins. It's a very restrictive policy for us, so they really get actually access to what they control. And because it is part of the GDPR, you cannot overexpose data if you are in multiple countries because you have to abide by the rules and governance policies of those countries. So but Okta actually works perfectly for us in that case.
Hi. Was there a country or region that the regulations were harder than others that you had to deal with?
Yes. I think
Say it, it's okay.
Germany was the toughest one. It is because it's not, see, in France there's one works council. In Germany it's region-based works council. So we had to go to 5 or 6 of those iterations depending on where the plants are located, which it's not difficult, but it's a time-consuming process. And I think we just, China was something that we didn't even attempt. So.
Yeah.
So you skipped over China? We had China, but not for G Suite. For G Suite, Google doesn't work in China, right? So. Yeah.
So speaking of Germany, regarding like the data residency requirements, how did you guys address that?
Yes. So our tenant is a European tenant in Frankfurt. That's it.
Did you ever consider multiple Okta tenants?
No, we did not consider multiple Okta tenants because we did our latency tests and we did our, we tested from North America, from London, from Germany, from Europe, and in all cases, the login performance was practically, we couldn't find the difference. If you're doing it in US and doing the login, because logging is not a transactional event. You log in once a day and you get Chrome will get a session for 24 hours and you're never logging it back again. And when you do SAML authentication, you're always relying on the third party to respond back anyway. So in our case, it worked out fine and we did a lot of tests and user performance is perfectly fine in all countries.
Hello.
Yeah.
Question for you. I noticed that you said that you went through and changed your email addresses on accounts. I'm curious, what did you find was the best combination of like SAM account name, user principal name, email address that applied globally that works the best for your environment?
So you're talking about the Okta login name?
Okta login name along with like email addresses, like sometimes like, SAM account name itself is limited to 20 characters. How did you work around that, especially with different nationalities, different names, naming conventions?
So we standardize on email address as the login name for Okta, right? And that was our standard way. We communicated, we worked with the individual countries and figured out what are the naming. So there's only one naming convention throughout the globe now.
We established a new naming convention.
That's it.
Of first name dot last name at their primary domain.
Right.
So,
That's it.
and we used, as he alluded to it earlier, we used a custom attribute in AD for that.
Because at this point in time, think about it, in your Active Directory, your profile email, you can't change that. If the moment you change that, your existing exchanges or Office 365, it's going to change that email address there. And you don't want it to be done on day one because you have data migrations, you haven't moved the users yet. So we used a custom attribute throughout. We found an empty attribute that is available everywhere, and that was the anchor point for us. So we put in, let's say, rahul.kumar@gaf.com in that custom attribute, and then we asked Okta to make that as when we imported the person in, we says, if that is filled, use that. If not filled, then use the email.
Right.
So that way, so once the Okta migration is done, everybody new person coming in on, let's say, January 1st is going to be rahul.kumar@gf.com on the mail attribute, which will automatically pick up because the custom attribute was only initial load attribute. Will never pick up. So that way we were able to solve that problem and did the data migrations, and everything else was supposed to be rolled out to the country.
And Okta is really great for managing those conflicts.
Oh, yes.
In any size company, you're going to have 5 Steve Smiths, right? So Okta, the beauty of Okta is we have a standard. I've written a standard workflow when our service desk creates these accounts. But if one slips through, right, and it creates a conflict, the Okta dashboard is great because you can very easily go in and see what your conflicts are and figure out how to resolve them.
Right.
Thank you.
Hi, so post-migration, what is the process for making changes to identity data going forward? Is it done in AD? Is it done in Okta directly?
We do it in AD.
Yeah, we're 90+% AD mastered. We do have a few one-offs here and there, but so the bulk of our source is AD for today.
Right. Which might change to HR once the HR master comes in, then the AD will become a slave of a master in that case.
What is the trust like between all your forests?
No, we don't have trusts. All these ADs are actually independent Active Directories because they can communicate over IP network. So there is no trust between them. That was the beauty of the Okta solution, is that we didn't have to establish a trust. Otherwise, there are different tools like VIS and Radiant Logic and all the other things that actually can do a virtual directory, but we couldn't use the virtual directory in those cases because they are so geographically distinctly located.
So what HR system are you using? Number one, and number two, can you talk a little bit about the MFA policies that you've either already put in place or that you're thinking about putting in place?
So I'm going to do the easy answer,
Workday?
and then you do the MFA one. Right? So we're using Workday as an HR. All right.
For MFA, as I said earlier, we just we're completing a pilot for AMFA. We actually turned on the behavior detection last July or August, so we could build a history for our users. We picked about 6 people in IT to be our initial pilot, and then I handpicked some of our sales force who are highly mobile. They go through a lot of states, and we decided upon what our factors are going to be. Ours are primarily geographic, but of course we're using new device, new IP, that type of thing. So, and that's from a behavior detection standpoint in the AMFA, that's what we're doing. We have a couple of security policies for authentication. We have what I'll call our exception policy, which we use for our service accounts, whether it be another cloud-based service that we're going to need a service account to drive into that's behind Okta, or whether it's a shared mailbox scenario that's used for something. But for our default users, we require a single multi-factor today, which we're looking to grow beyond because we are still heavily reliant on secret question and password. We want to move away from that and try to enforce more advanced.
More advanced YubiKeys.
We have what I would call a decent acceptance in terms of we've got a Verify, we've got Authenticator, and so we've got a decent user base who leverages those. We have probably, I think our second highest is SMS. So we've got, we don't have any of the hard keys turned on in our environment right now, but obviously those do support, so if we wanted to expand into that in the future, we could.
Right. All right, guys, thank you very much. Thank you for attending the session.